I'd like to move into welcoming our special guest today, Dr. Alan Williams. So let me give you a little bit of background. Dr. Williams is a sixth-generation family farmer and founding partner of Grass-Fed Insights, as well as Understanding Ag, that's short for agriculture, and the Soil Health Academy. He's consulted with more than 4,000 farmers and ranchers across the United States, Canada, Mexico, South America, and other countries on operations ranging from a few acres to over 1 million acres. Alan pioneered many of the early regenerative grazing protocols and forage finishing techniques and now teaches those practices and principles to farmers globally. He's a quote-unquote recovering academic, nice, having served 15 years on the faculty of Louisiana Tech University and Mississippi State University. He holds a BS and an MS in animal science from Clemson University and a PhD in livestock genetics from LSU. He's authored more than 400 scientific and popular press articles. He's an invited speaker at regional, national, and international conferences and symposia. Wow. Talk about an intro. Dr. Williams, welcome to Understanding CBD.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I've been really looking forward to this interview today, Dr. Williams. And one of the things one of the first videos I saw of you, you were standing on one of your farmers' lands, and I think it was a new class you were talking to, and you described how the land that they were standing on used to be roaming with teams of bison, different species of bison. There were a biodiversity of plants in that area. And while they're standing on that land, you also mentioned that it used to be 10 inches higher from I guess a lot of things that we're going to talk about today. But, just to kick us off and get started, what happened? Where did we go wrong, right? I mean, the Bible says, take care of your land for 6 days, the seventh day let it rest. What happened to the soil?
That's a very good question, and the fact of the matter is that we've washed most of it into our gulfs, bays, oceans, rivers, streams, you name it, due to just poor agricultural practices over now here in North America, spanning almost 500 years from the time the Spaniards came in the early 1500s to now. We have sort of had a history of doing this, of implementing some very poor practices, both from tillage practices and grazing practices. And, if we keep in mind the 1930s Dust Bowl, we created that. So, and we're really headed back in the same direction again with some of the things that we're implementing on the ground.
So, Dr. Williams, keeping that in mind and how low quality the soil is, how does that actually impact our food?
Hugely. It is actually, it's almost a travesty what we're looking at today relative to the nutrient density and quality of our food, because we are literally farming subsoil in so many areas across North America now. And on top of that, we're combining that with extensive tillage practices and over-application of synthetics and chemicals and other things. Most of the foods that we consume today have significantly lower nutritive value than they had 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and beyond, to the point that, just as an example, if I want to eat blueberries, for instance, today I would need to eat anywhere from 6 to 10 times the amount of blueberries to get the same amount of nutrition that I would have just 50 plus years ago.
Wow, that is pretty tough. How do you then analyze the soil? Is there a definition for healthy soil?
First of all, I'll start with, you know it when you see it. And, what we do is we use a suite of tests. One is what we call the Haney test, Haney. The other is a PLFA, that stands for phospholipid fatty acid test. And the third is what we call a TNE, or total nutrient extraction. When we use those three tests in combination, it allows us to be able to test the three primary characteristics of the soil: physical, chemical, and biological. Our problem is that over the last 8 decades, we've sort of acted as if chemistry drives everything in the soil, and that is the be-all, end-all, when actually it is totally the opposite. Biology drives chemistry and is the determiner of whether we're going to build soil health or not. So we have sort of abandoned the biological component of this, And that's the component that we now are paying a lot more attention to. And one of the things that we know is that as we significantly improve the biology of the soil, we can physically see this on our farms through this incredible burst of biodiversity, from plant species to beneficial insects, birds, you name it.
Yeah, so speaking of the farm, and we have a soft spot for the farmers, of course. So how about the farmer? What's the current quality of life for our farmers and growers of food?
Unfortunately, over the last several decades, it's been steadily declining. The ability to be able to make a living off of farming and what they produce has been reduced dramatically. This has increased the rates of depression and even the rates of suicide. Suicide among farmers now actually ranks in the top 5 of all professions for suicide rates, and not just here in the U.S., but globally. We're seeing record numbers of bankruptcies being filed every year in North America, particularly in the U.S., even for the last 5 years in a row. So the economic and financial parameters of farming have declined dramatically, and it has certainly impacted the quality of life of the farmer. And with regenerative agriculture, that's one of the things that we see absolutely reversing. Quality of life goes way up, profitability increases significantly, and just the overall tenor and quality of what these farmers are doing increases every day.
Yeah, well, we're going to take a break in a minute, but before we do, I wanted to ask you, this isn't new. This has been happening for decades. Pandemic hits, and what sort of happened to the food supply there? What did we learn?
We learned that a highly aggregated, concentrated food supply is actually a pretty big detriment and a threat to our country, and that these supply lines and even the ability of these processing plants to process our food, handle our food, get it out, get it distributed out to restaurants, grocery stores, etc., is a threat, and that we need to change the way that we're doing things here in the U.S. relative to that food supply and the safety and ability to disseminate that food supply to our population.
And what did that do to the health of the farmers and their businesses?
Well, it was twofold. If you were a conventional or commodity farmer, there were significant issues, especially if you were a livestock farmer. They were just absolutely hammered. Prices dropped like a rock for their commodity products, beef, pork, chicken, milk, you name it. But if you were a regenerative farmer, we actually saw the exact opposite occurring. Demand for their food product increased dramatically because they were the groups of people, including us, we're regenerative farmers ourselves. Those of us that were doing this and the branded food programs in regenerative farming were able to quickly assemble the food that was needed, aggregate it, get it out to the population. So we didn't have the constraints that the big commodity food sector had.
Well, that's good to hear. Stay tuned. We're going to come back with some solutions Dr. Alan Williams has for us. Welcome back into Understanding CBD. Hello there, Max Sobel.
Welcome back, Stephen Woolman.
Thank you. We're talking with Dr. Alan Williams, a champion of the grass-fed beef industry, expert in grazing methodologies and regenerative agriculture, sharing some ground truth with us on turning this farming and soil and environment around here. The song is Alabama, High Cotton. You have a history with those boys, don't you, Dr. Alan?
Yeah, actually I do. Go back more than 25 years with them, and particularly with Teddy Gentry. And Teddy and I have worked together, for quite a while in regenerative agriculture. And Teddy actually developed a breed of cattle specifically for grass-fed beef production in the Deep South called the South Pole, and was truly instrumental in pushing regenerative agriculture forward in the early years of these whole efforts.
And you said the magic words, regenerative agriculture. It's a bit of a tongue twister for me. I apologize. But let's dig into that. Would you mind telling us what that is?
Yeah, regenerative agriculture is really farming and ranching in synchrony with nature in a way that revitalizes, restores, rebuilds, and regenerates the ecosystems and just the whole environment around us. And we use what we call the 643, the 6 principles of soil health, the 4 ecosystem processes, and the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship to be able to effectively get this done. And that's basically what we teach everybody that we work with, whether they attend our soil health academies or whether we work with them one-on-one as farmers and ranchers through Understanding Ag.
Gotcha. So to give some people the context, about 40% of all U.S. land is farmland. There are over 900 million acres spread around 2 million farms throughout the country. And I don't know if you know this, but is there a stat? What percentage of farmers are using regenerative practices on their farm?
Well, that's a very good question. Currently, it's a little less than 5%, but it is growing very, very rapidly. 10 years ago, it was less than 0.1%. So now we're already up to over 5%, and again, we're continuing to grow quite rapidly in that regard. Just within Understanding Ag, we're currently working across about 22 million acres in the U.S. that are somewhere along the regenerative journey. And we're getting consistently calls from many other countries all over the world wanting to do the same thing. So it's not just a North American interest, but it is definitely a growing global interest.
And with those farmers, at what rate are they switching over to regenerative farming? And at what point does it become profitable, I guess is a good question, too, because I'm sure they're wondering.
Yeah, one of the biggest fears by most farmers, and probably one of the biggest barriers, no doubt, is they feel like this is going to be an economic drain on them for maybe the first 2, 3, or 4 years. And so because of the debt load that many farmers currently carry, they're quite fearful of that. But actually, it's the opposite. Transitioning to regenerative ag does not mean that in the first 1, 2, or 3 years you're going to lose money. Not at all. As a matter of fact, the majority of the farmers that we work with that make this transition actually end up making more net revenue even in year 1 and certainly by year 2 and year 3. So we work very hard initially to be able to dissolve those fears. And one of the other biggest barriers is just simply peer pressure. Other farmers and ranchers, neighbors, family, everybody that sells them something, they get a lot of peer pressure put on them not to change what they're doing. So they have to overcome both that economic fear and then the fear of the peer pressure. But once we get beyond those two barriers, they can make very, very rapid progress.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And Alan, you were a 6th-generation farmer, very well educated. Did you learn regenerative agriculture in school?
No.
Really?
Quite the opposite. We learned conventional agriculture, and we learned it very well. And when I was in academia, when I was a researcher and a professor, that's what I taught. I taught very conventional agriculture, and it actually took me a while to really realize what was going on, what was happening there, and the changes that we needed to make. And one of the key components of that change in my thought process was that I kept going back to how things were when I was growing up on the farm. I grew up very luckily on a highly diversified farm in South Carolina. 80+% of what we ate when I was growing up, we produced on the farm. So I enjoyed this incredible food experience, and I I had to go back once I got into commodity agriculture and ask myself, okay, when I was growing up, how come we didn't have to use all of these chemicals, all of these synthetics, all of these pharmaceuticals, and our animals and our crops did quite well? My family was able to buy and pay for land for more than 6 generations, and yet all of a sudden now we absolutely rely on all of these things. So that was a seminal moment for me, coming to that realization and having to think back through that process. So I call it coming full circle. I basically had to go back to my roots to understand what we really needed to do.
Yeah, and I guess that's the holy grail, is to have farmers and food producers really have that epiphany, which leads me to my next question, which do you run into skeptics? Are there people that are opposed to this or weary of it?
Oh, yes. There are absolutely skeptics, and the number of skeptics are growing simply because the impact of regenerative agriculture is growing, and that was to be expected. We're seeing many of the major agribusiness corporations that are pushing back pretty hard because they view this as a threat to ability to be able to sell their products, and so no doubt we're going to continue to face some heavy pressure, but the results are such that we're going to continue to push through that because we have the direct evidence on the ground. And what we tell any skeptic is that, first of all, we have the case studies and the data to substantiate what we're teaching and what we're promoting. But then secondly, come visit our farms. If you don't believe us, seeing is believing. We're open. We invite anybody to come visit us and take a tour of our farms.
Well, that's interesting, and I think I urge everyone to do, and we'll get your contact information later. If people are just tuning in, we're here with Dr. Alan Williams from Understanding Ag, talking about regenerative agriculture. What's the role the universities are playing now? Because I know, especially in the hemp industry that we're in, a lot of the programs for our hemp farmers are tied in with universities. What's their role in this regenerative revolution? Is that right?
It's mixed. Having been there and lived that life, we're no different than anybody else. We're subject to the same biases and everything else that any farmer, any rancher, any consumer is. And so what I do know is this, is that many researchers at our universities are still stuck in the same old. They're still stuck in the commodity sector and still doing most of their research and efforts in that area. However, we do have faculty members at different universities that are starting to transition what they're doing in their research and their teaching into regenerative principles and practices. So we are working with some of those, but make no mistake about it, it's still a long road ahead for most of our universities to really move forward substantially in this direction, and we're going to rely on the academic pioneers to continue to push their fellow colleagues forward.
Gotcha. Now, I'd imagine if you're a farmer and you're feeling these pressures, you're feeling the pressure from the insurance companies, the inputs that you're having, whether it's herbicides, pesticides, the seed companies. I'd imagine we don't need to tell you this. This is not new for you. A lot of people, Alan, are probably hearing this message and say, I'm looking for a way out. Mm-hmm. How do they get started with your program? What's the first step that they can take?
The very first step is just simply to contact us. And we offer a host of educational opportunities from our online curriculum. Last December, we released what we call Regen Ag 101, that is a 9-module online curriculum with an incredible array of augmented material associated with it. We also have in-person, week-long intensive academies that are conducted on host farms that are actually doing regenerative ag. So it's sort of a learning as you're doing type of deal. And then, of course, we offer follow-up consultation so that once they gain some of that initial education that they're going to need, then we provide the boots on the ground follow-up that they're going to need to continue to work through challenges and issues that they face.
All right. So then what about on the consumer side of the equation? What do consumers need to know? And I know that you worked for the USDA, so I know you have some opinions about the food pyramid that we've been told for years, right?
It's backwards. Flip it upside down, and then you got it right, to be quite honest. And that was one thing that I had to change my thinking on as well. But all of the more recent research just really corroborates that we've had this food pyramid absolutely upside down. We absolutely need good proteins. We need good fats. They're vital to the health and functioning of our body and to our own longevity. So, that's one of the things that we've got to continue to work on and to help the consumer understand. But within Understanding Ag and the Soil Health Academy, we also offer an array of learning materials, educational materials for the consumer. We have a host of articles and webinars and case studies and so forth that are available for anybody to take advantage of free of charge. And so we would urge, not just farmers and ranchers, but consumers as well, to log on to our website so that they can learn a lot more about regenerative ag and healthy food.
Yeah, it's a good resource. You're going to have to take it up. Now, most grocery stores, at least local, we're in Maryland, about 10% of the products they have are organic. The rest of the stuff is, just mixed. A lot of our customers also, we're dealing with aches and pains, anxiety, a lot of arthritis and issues that diet can help. But when I talk to someone about buying organic food, they say it's so expensive. What do you say to them?
Well, the first thing that I would say is that food is also our medicine. It's our nutrition, it's our medicine, it's our enjoyment, and it's often the reason for families gathering together and friends gathering together and enjoying a good time. But medical care, pharmaceutical prescriptions, all of those types of things are incredibly expensive. And if we can spend just a little bit more on good food, then we'll spend a lot less on all of these other things that are taking away a lot of our expendable income. The other thing that we have found is that if you eat healthier foods, truly nutrient-dense food, then you actually don't need to eat near as much. And obviously that helps us to start to alleviate the significant obesity issue that we have across this country as well. And we know that obesity leads to inflammation, and inflammation leads to a whole host of health problems.
Yeah, don't we know?
Indeed.
Now, we barely scratched the surface, Alan, but we did cover a lot in the time allotted. If you can imagine, the time's up now. But we do appreciate you. How can people connect with you and your organization?
Yes, they can go to understandingag.com and find us there, and they can also go to soilhealthacademy.org.
We urge you all to follow up with there. Dr. Alan Williams, we can't thank you enough for joining us today. Thank you again. We'll talk to you soon.